Hello, guys. Welcome to another episode of Elevated Podcast. I'm so excited to be here with my second special guest of the month. Her name is Victoria Rivera.
Hi, everyone.
She's kind of nervous, but we just want to start things out. We want to kick this episode off. The theme of this episode is called "I Will Not Be a Product of My Environment." And as a woman, as a young, successful woman, I wanted to highlight some situations in her life that she went through in order to realize not only her dreams, but her God-given potential. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Are you ready, Victoria?
I am ready.
All right, sounds good. Well,
Thank you.
Hope you guys enjoy. All right, guys? All right, so Victoria, I have the first question for you here. I did want to speak on kind of how you grew up and what are the things that impacted you growing up within your environment, within your family? What are some things that you can give, a retrospect to people on how you grew up and what impacted you?
Yeah, thank you, first of all, Juan, for having me on here.
Absolutely.
So I think as far as growing up, I grew up as the eldest daughter of 5 kids. I was a pastor's kid. And so being a pastor's kid already kind of comes with stereotypes and a way that you're supposed to be and act and live in the church. And it's not always easy. The spotlight is constantly on you.
Absolutely.
And so it was difficult growing up just being in the spotlight, especially because I don't always like everyone to be paying attention to everything that I do.
The limelight.
The limelight, exactly. So growing up, it was a struggle for me because I heard so many things about what a pastor's kid was, and I heard the typical stereotype of, the pastor's kids are the worst. They go to service, but then after service or on the weekends, they're a completely different person. And so, unfortunately, I did see a lot of my friends who are pastor's kids, kind of just fall into this trap that people set for them, and they kind of did become, this type of stereotype. And so I was always nervous and scared that I was going to end up like that until I realized, I do have my own agency. I do have my own free will to make my own decisions. And so there came a point where I decided that I needed to make my own choices. I needed to be who I was, and that I couldn't let that fear of turning out like all my pastor's kid friends define me or bind me. And so I began to have to make my own decisions. And, I messed up along the way. I'm not perfect, but it was definitely difficult. And so I am grateful, though, for my parents who never once put that pressure on me to act a certain way. There was even a lot of church people who had a lot of grace with us. And so I'm grateful for my church family, my parents, my father as a pastor just was a very healthy pastor. He set a lot of healthy boundaries for us. And so that really helped a lot. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it was up to me to decide my own future, to decide what kind of young person I was going to be growing up, and to not let that stereotype of a pastor's kid define me. That's really when I had to step in.
So I know that you are a studious, educational woman. You are educated. Can you just kind of go briefly? What kind of degrees do you have? And I just want to ask you that first.
Yeah, sure. So I came to LABI, which is my favorite school out of all of them that I've been to.
Yeah, LABI.
Yeah, I got my associate here in Bible ministry, and then from here I decided I wanted to do I wanted to be an MFT, a Master's in Family Therapy. Wow. So I went to Vanguard to get my psychology degree. So I got my bachelor's in that. And then I realized that perhaps MFT was not really what I wanted to do. So God changed my course a little bit, and I ended up going across the country to North Carolina, where I got my master's degree at Duke University in their divinity school in theology and theological studies. And currently applying for PhD programs, so excited about that. But yeah, that's about where I've come from. The journey has been really crazy. God has switched my path a couple times, but I always come right back to Scripture. So I'm hoping to continue in that and make a living out of that, hopefully.
Absolutely. That sounds all great. As you guys can see, she's very studious and educated. And so we did want to I wanted to emphasize a little bit on your teen years and your early 20s. So as a teen, you grew up here in LA, correct?
Mm-hmm. Orange County.
And how was can you give us a little insight in your transition from a teen to a early 20s kid, growing up, adulting? What was that like, and what are kind of like? Can you give us two kind of like monumental moments that you realize like, wow, I'm actually an adult and I actually need to get it together?
Yeah. Yeah, so in my teen years, that's where I did struggle a bit, typical. But I think that really in my teen years is where I had to learn my identity. I did have a relationship in my teen years that lasted about 5 years, believe it or not. And it ended up not being the healthiest relationship for me. If anything, it was extremely unhealthy. And this is really where I had to make a decision about what I wanted for my life. And one thing I learned as far as, in the 17, 18-year mark was that, just because I had a history with someone didn't mean that I had to make that my future.
Can you repeat that one more time for everyone listening, please?
Just because you have a history with someone does not mean that you need to make them your future. And that's especially if, they're not the person that God has called you to be with. And so letting go of that relationship was one of the most hardest things I've ever had to do. It was really an adult moment. It could not have been done by myself. I needed the strength of the Lord to really get me through that. And it was, of course, I fell into a very deep depression and just went through a lot about that just because, this person had become part of my identity, had become, everything that I knew growing up as a teenager. And so letting go of this person meant also letting go of a piece of myself that I, had formed around this person. And so that definitely wasn't the healthiest for me and something that I learned, quite early on. And I think my second moment was here at LABI, actually. I was 18 and a half, and I remember I was here for a week, and I wanted to go home already. I was not feeling it. But then I was in chapel one day, and I remember God just speaking to me, and, God asked me, are you willing to give it all to me? And I was upset because I was like, God, I gave everything to you already. This relationship that I treasured, I gave that to you.
Just when you feel like you've given all to God,
exactly.
He expects more from
what
you.
What more
Absolutely.
can I give? And I remember God just calling me out and saying, do you feel like you've been my disciple? And I just remember thinking, of course, my entire life I've been in church and ministry. I've done everything. Yeah. But in that moment was when I had to realize that perhaps I had been a Christian, but I hadn't really been a disciple of Christ. I was a Christian because my parents were. I was at church every Sunday trying to be my best and do my best and show face for people, even when I wasn't feeling okay. But, God really called me into a new place in that moment where he said, what is your relationship with me? Are you truly my disciple? And that was my second moment where, I kind of view that as my conversion moment in which, I truly became a disciple of Christ and not just a Christian that went to church every Sunday. And so that's kind of, those were monumental moments for me because from then on out, all the decisions that I made were now made in the will of God and giving that relationship to God and deciding to become a disciple of Christ was the biggest thing I could have done for my life because at that moment is when the entire trajectory of my life changed and I could not be where I am today had I not made those difficult but very necessary decisions.
Absolutely. I think that once, kind of we're talking about God and things of that nature, but when we kind of like not water it down, but when we look at it in a human way, I think that we all have to go through a transition in our life in order for us to reach the full potential because there are some things that we need to let go. Sometimes it's toxic relationships. Other times it's things that we by habit have. And so, I think that's very important. To conclude here, I did want to follow up with these following words. So I want to finish off with this quote. Surround yourself with dreamers and the doers, the believers and the thinkers. But most of all, surround yourself with those who see greatness within you, even if you don't see it yourself. I think that it's very important for us to find that grit inside of us and fight for what we want. And as we can see here, I know that you've had a lot of pressure, even in the kind of in the educational background of it, to be that person or that statistic that everybody wants to see. But I think that we're not called to be like everyone else.
That's right.
And we're called to change and be catalysts amongst the environment and our culture and society. So those are my final words. I do want to allow you to give the final words, Victoria. What is kind of like, just give a sort of an inspirational kind of like last minute pep talk for all those who don't seem to say, well, I'm gonna be like my mother, or I'm gonna be like my father. And the generations from generations, it keeps on happening, and so I guess I'm gonna have to turn out this way. My dad became an alcoholic, and my mom is a prostitute, or my dad went to prison, and so I think that's my end. But can you go ahead and give that kind of like some inspiration for those people out there who are struggling to find their grit inside?
Yeah. So what I would definitely say is that, we are not products of our environment, and we do not have to be products of our environment. I think the beauty of the Christian life is that we have free will. And so, if you've grown up and, you're expected to be a certain way because your mother or your father was a certain way, know that you do have agency, know that you do have a choice. And really, I encourage you to surround yourself with people who, like Juan said, see the best in you, who will bring out the best in you, who will encourage you to make those tough choices even when they're hard, but they're for your own good. So really just surround yourself with those people who have like-minded dreams and goals and visions for their life, because, as a quote goes, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so if you are spending time with people who, just consistently don't aim for anything, or truly are just walking in circles, find people who will lift you up, who will encourage you, and who will really just encourage you to step out and to dream, and to get out of your comfort zone, and to do things you never imagined yourself doing, and to make the choices that are necessary to fulfill the future and the purpose that God has for you. And really, when you can understand that you have the choice. And, there's another beautiful quote that I love that says, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it.
Yes.
And so that 90% gives us the control to really control what we want to do, what our future is. And so surround yourself with great people, let go of the things and people you need to let go of, and let God handle the rest.
Amen. And I 100% agree with you. Thank you, Victoria, for being a
you.
special guest here at the Women Empowerment Month
Yes.
here on my podcast. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And it's a privilege to have you on here as a special guest. Thank you guys. Tune in next week for my next episode. Later, guys.